voice. That's what this is about. So on that, I'd like to introduce Senator Kamala Harris, the presidential candidate, and I hope everybody listens well. The panelists, great questions, and again, thank you for being here.
Am I on? What's up? Oh. Hi, it's Kamala Harris, and I'm honored to be a part of the Frank LaMere Native American Presidential Forum. OJ, thank you for your words. I'm looking forward to our discussion. I only have a few comments to make as we begin, and it is that there's unequivocal support and respect that I have for the sovereignty of Native tribes, and that this is a lifelong commitment. I was raised and grew up always knowing about and feeling very strongly about what we need to do to speak truth about the generations of violence and oppression that have occurred against our Native Americans at the hands of the American government, of the United States government. And there is work we need to do and continue to do that is about not only restoring tribal land, but also acknowledging the historical trauma that has resulted from those many years of violence and frankly, crimes that were committed. These were crimes that ranged from murder and rape to theft in profound proportions. And so I am honored to be with the leaders who are a part of this forum. I thank you for bringing us all together. I'm sorry I am not there in person, but I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you directly.
Thank you, Senator. We have two tyrannies to worry about. One, colonialism, but the other is the clock. So we have candidates from here on out, so we're going to move fairly quickly. We'll start again with our elder, Marcella LeBeau. With the first question.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here and to be a part of this great movement. And my question today is back home on the Cheyenne River Reservation, I believe that there is a pervasive sadness that exists because the medals of honor that were given at Wounded Knee, and there has never been resolution to that. So my question is, do you support the removal of the Sane Act? That's my question today.
Yes, I do. And the reality is that the Battle of Wounded Knee killed at least 100 and I think almost 146, if I recall, Native Americans from the Sioux tribe. It was a massacre. And we have to, again, history has to reflect fact. And that was a massacre. And I feel strongly that given my longstanding position about making sure that we acknowledge the wrongs that communities have experienced and that we acknowledge that what we can do currently to address those wrongs is important. So yes, and thank you.
Thank you. Our first question comes from Stephen Rowe Lewis from Gila River.
Thank you. Senator Harris, I'm representing the Yakima, O'odham, and Peepash people from the Gila River Indian community. Climate change is the issue of our generation. 7 generations from now, our generation will be remembered for how we address it. Native communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change because of our reliance on subsistence lifestyles and economies, and because it is not easy for us to move from our homelands. Water, our shuduk, is critical for my community, but our major source of water is the Colorado River, which is overallocated and threatened by a prolonged drought. As president, what steps will you take to ensure that Native nations have a seat at the table in developing solutions to climate change?
Without any question, as the original people and always as leaders on this issue of what we need to do to respect and honor the climate and the earth and all that is on it, I will look to you for leadership, and you will be front and center in terms of what we need to do to preserve our natural resources, and also to your point about water, what we need to do to ensure that this precious and diminishing resource, that we have policies that are smart about preserving it and increasing our ability to do, and if you'll allow me the details of it, to do everything from what we must around capture of water, storage of water, recycling, conservation. And it is the Native people who have always understood that better than most. And we need to look to you, and I will look to you for not only the best practices, but also we need to also just to some extent change the culture on the subject. And you have always, as the Native people and as the tribes have always, by culture, respected this earth in a way that so many have not, which is why we're facing the crisis that we're now facing.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Sue Maston. You're up.
Hi, I'm Susan Maston. I had the distinct honor to serve my people as the Yurok Tribal Chair, but I also served Indian country as the past president for the National Congress of American Indians. And only 2 women have been elected to that position in 50 years. So we are from California. We are on our homelands, which are on the Klamath River, which is the 2nd largest river in the state of California. We're a fishing people, and our rights are not quantified yet. And so we have to sit every year with the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation and it actually is disgraceful that we have to do that we have to spend our time, money, and resources to remind the government about their trust responsibilities, not only to the tribes, but to the resource itself. And so to have to go there every year to plead for the health of the Klamath River ecosystem is shameful. And I think that the most horrific thing that I had to experience as a chairperson was when the government decided in a dry water year to allocate fish to the ag business instead of to the fish, and 80,000 fish died, 80,000 adult Chinook on the lower 20 miles of the Klamath River, which is on the Yurok Reservation. That should never be acceptable in this time and era. And so my question is, with that, because other tribes are in the same situation in California and on the West for not having their water rights quantified, but we retain that federally reserved fishing and water right. And so my question to you is, what will your administration do to assure the protection of federally reserved water rights?
Well, let me start. Well, first of all, congratulations, and thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity. First of all, it will be my policy that there will be tribal consultation with cabinet officials, whoever that cabinet official may be, who is working on climate change, and so that we can be very clear about not only what you have in terms of input, but also what will happen in terms of impact. Because it is, and from my perspective, and I feel very strongly, this has to be about both. It has to be about seeking the advice and perspective, but also before there's an implementation of any policy or perspective, that we have very carefully and thoughtfully considered and have full input from you on what might be the impact, not only the immediate impact, but the long-term impact, and also the impact from a historical perspective. And so part of that is about making sure that there is consultation with the tribal leaders by all cabinet officials on any policy or practice that is that affects climate change, but frankly, so many others, because if you include laws that impact the tribes, the federal laws that impact the tribes are very complicated. And it is also my intention to consult with the tribes and including on judicial nominations and on the decisions that we make in a variety of ways that without that consultation cannot ensure that we have appropriately considered the impact on the tribes.
I appreciate that, but more importantly, I hope that you spend time with us to learn, because unfortunately that is one thing that is not taught in the schools, is that unique relationship, that unique government-to-government relationship that tribal nations hold with the federal government.
I agree, and thank you. And I look forward to that time together.
Thank you. The next question from Harold Frazier from Cheyenne River.
My name is Harold Frazier, Chairman of Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. You know, one of the things I think is really important to Indian country is land into trust. You know, and one of the things that kind of appalls me is we have to ask the government for our lands back. I mean, we were here first, and these are our lands. And when you talk about sovereignty and treaty rights, I really hope that each of you candidates not only mention it, but live it and practice it. So I have a question. When you were Attorney General, there are a number of tribal trust land applications, also known as fee to trust, by California tribes that your office opposed. To clear up some confusion with the tribal community, why did your office oppose these applications? In addition, as president, what will be your position regarding tribal land acquisitions and the protection of tribal lands?
Yeah. So first, let me just say, I strongly believe and take very seriously that we must acknowledge that the government of the United States stole land, took land from the tribes, and that there must be a restoration of that ownership for those lands that were possessed by the tribes. So that is a value I hold very dearly and very strongly. When I was Attorney General, I had a number of responsibilities, including being a lawyer for the governor. And it was in that capacity when the governor I was the lawyer for the governor, and the governor made decisions about the fee to trust applications by California tribes. As the lawyer, as the law office for the governor, we had to file those letters. But that was never a reflection and has never been a reflection of my personal perspective. And when I have had the ability to independently act, not on behalf of a client, I think my history and my positions are very clear, which is that there has to be a restoration of tribal land. And my view is very strongly that the acquisition of land in trust is essential to tribal self-determination and providing the foundation for not only economic but also political growth, and it has to be honored, and that the sovereignty of the tribes must be honored in that regard.
Our next question comes from David Sickey, Casada Tribe of Louisiana.
Hi, good afternoon, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure, it's an honor and a privilege to be here at this historic forum over the course of 2 days. I am the tribal chairman for the Casada Tribe of Louisiana. We are one of 4 federally recognized tribes in the state. We can trace our documented history back to 1540 when the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto encountered a group of 250 or so tribal people. It's an honor to be here. We are a 960 tribal member nation located in southwest Louisiana, and yet we are one of the top 10 largest private employers in the state of Louisiana, which we are very proud of. Senator Harris, as you are well aware, your esteemed colleague and friend, Governor Gavin Newsom, issued a historic blanket genocidal apology, the first ever by any governor of all the states here in the Union. And also, Senator Harris, you're well aware that you have more Native Americans in the state of California than any other state in the Union. And I also know that your position on withdrawing troops and bringing them back home from Afghanistan, I'm also aware of that. And some of you in this room, and Senator Harris, you may be well aware that also we Native Americans are the highest percentage of military personnel as a segment of society than any other.
Yes.
Which we are also very proud of.
Right.
And knowing that, and given all that, and given the cost of war in terms of finances and human capital, we need to reconstruct our own native nations here in this wonderful country and restore them back to its former glory that it once was before they were decimated. George C. Marshall, during his remarks at Harvard, introduced a policy, and he said, "Our policy is not directed against any country, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos." Senator, given that, will you, as our President of the United States, commit to a Marshall Plan for Indian country to help the most impoverished people in our land?
Yes. Yes. I think there's no question that there needs to be much more focus in a very organized way that is about addressing the harm, addressing the impact, addressing the generational impact, and thinking about how moving forward we can make sure that that we are acknowledging it. Yes.
Our next question comes from Melanie Benjamin from Mille Lacs.
Good afternoon. Melanie Benjamin from the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota. And I want to say welcome. And also thank you for attending today. And also thank you for meeting with the tribal leaders after the Detroit debate. It was a very nice meeting.
Yes, very helpful for me too. Thank you.
So my question is going to be language immersion and cultural-based education. Mm-hmm. Education has been a pillar of your campaign. Education can be transformative in many positive ways, but the boarding school era is a testament to the ways in which education can be and has been used by the United States to purposefully destroy Native people, cultures, and language. Mm-hmm. Reversal of this federal policy and restoration of culturally based education and language immersion schools is an imperative for a survival for ourselves as people. As president, what would you do to reverse the centuries of damaging federal policy and restore culture and language in our educational systems?
Right. And thank you for the time that you spent with me. I will tell you, this is something I've worked on and been aware of for quite some time. We had on this call one of the elders, but we know that generation, we're losing those generations who know and speak the language. And because so much of it was part of oral tradition, it's not been written down. And so we have to put the resources into capturing it. And there should be some real focus on how we do that in a way that puts the resources into it. So I am very aware of this issue and supportive of what we need to do to make sure that these precious languages are not lost. To lose them is to lose part of our history and culture. And so that has to be about a federal investment through the Department of Education, because I do agree with you. This is an issue that is about education in a way that we make a priority of preserving the language as well as the culture, and do it in a way that also is not only about preservation, but also then the education of future generations.
Our next question comes from John Echohart from the Native American Rights Fund.
Thank you for participating in this forum, Senator Harris.
Thank you.
The Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted in 1978 to address the stark number of Native children being taken from their families and communities. At the time, 25 to 35% of all Native children were being taken from their parents and of those, 85% of children were placed with non-native families and outside of their tribal communities. Even today, Native children are still 4 times overrepresented in foster care. Despite the success and importance of the Indian Child Welfare Act, a judge in Texas ruled the law unconstitutional last October. The ruling was overturned by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals earlier this month. As president, how will you protect landmark legislation like the Indian Child Welfare Act and other laws designed to uphold the rights of tribes to protect the welfare, well-being, and fate of their children? And as president, what qualifications will you look for in judicial nominees who may hear cases regarding tribal sovereignty?
All right, thank you. Well, I'll tell you, look, you can look to my history to know what I'll do in the future. I, as Attorney General of California, led the ICWA issue as a civil rights issue because, from my perspective, this is a civil rights issue instead of, only being a matter of compliance, right? It's a matter of rights and responsibilities and standards. And so when I was Attorney General, I looked out at issues impacting a number of populations of children, including our Native children, and saw that we were not doing enough. And so I created within the California Department of Justice a division that I named the Bureau of Children's Justice. And it is through that division that I actually started asking the hard questions of counties and others about whether they were actually in compliance with ICWA, and also doing the work of investigating whether or not they were. And this eventually actually led to what we created, which was the ICWA Compliance Task Force, because to your point, I was all too aware that there was not compliance across the board. This is a fundamental issue. This is about the children of the tribes. It is about, one must understand that there are a variety of issues that are also and should be part of our sense of responsibility around how those children end up in foster care systems. And but the reality of it is that they should not just be lost in the system. We must understand this is about, again, preserving not only sovereignty for the tribes, but preserving the future, and with an acknowledgement of the importance of making sure these children know and have their rightful connection to the tribes. And so I feel very strongly about it. I think of it as a civil rights issue. So it is not only about compliance with ICWA and making that a priority, because ICWA doesn't matter if we don't enforce it and if we don't audit it to make sure that people are complying with it. But the second piece of this is the laws that apply to ICWA in terms of the rights of the families and the rights of those children are complicated, and not all the judges know it and understand it. And so part of the issue for me is also making sure that in my capacity to appoint members to the bench, just to your point about that court case, that we look for people who are familiar with these laws so that we can make sure that when these cases get to a courtroom, that justice actually occurs.
Thank you.
Senator, this is Mark Trahant, the moderator, and I just want to follow up a little bit with that. There are 3,600 roughly Article III judges, and one of them is a Native American. What can we do to get better representation in the federal judiciary?
We need a new president. and a president who understands this. I mean, listen, I've seen these. I've seen these cases. In a courtroom, I understand how it happens. This is not some theoretical, intellectual conversation for me. I've seen it. I've seen those babies, those children. I've seen the family members try to make sure that the culture and that there are reasons we have ICWA, which is that so many children have been displaced, again, because of the historical treatment of the tribes by this country. And so again, this is not something that is just I've read about. I know it, I've seen it, and I feel very strongly. You know, there is so much, I think, about public policy that you can judge based on how it treats a child. And ICWA, at its core, is just that point. It is frankly, it is about how the Native people have been treated. You know, ICWA is a real symbol of the mistreatment and the abuse. And so I feel very strongly about it. So it is about appointing judges who understand this and understand the impact on families, on communities, and overall on the tribes.
Our last question comes from Russell Buster Atterbury from the Karak tribe.
Ayuki Hutkich Nithyanamum. Hello, how are you? My name
How are
is.
you? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here.
We're all busy. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Again, my name is Buster Atterbury. I'm the chairman for the Karuk tribe, and we are just upriver from the Yurok tribe, and we're the second largest tribe in California, and the Yurok tribe is the largest tribe in California. So it is a well-known fact that Native Americans' lifestyles have been one that reflects a balance between the environment and Mother Nature. The environmentalists want to keep people out and do nothing to protect and preserve Mother Nature. The corporate world wants the socio-economic approach, money first. Native Americans advocate for a socio-ecological plan first, and the economics will follow. Native Americans have a unique relationship with Mother Nature. We have lived here sustainably for thousands of years. Tribal ecological knowledge is a lifestyle. Land management practices are a form of our religion. People who live here have lived here that long. I'm not done. Who have lived here that long have had to been keen observers of our environment and acquired a wealth of ecological knowledge. Even though we have not had meaningful consultation, the Karuk tribe and others have not sat by idly and twiddled their thumbs. The Karuk tribe has developed a TREX program, which is a training exchange program which educates different agencies on how to use fire to reduce the fuels for the devastating fires that we have had. This is a practice that the tribes used for thousands of years until 100 years ago when it was against the law. We have also developed a comprehensive forest adaptation plan. Today, our forests are burning, our homes are burning, our rivers and tributaries are drying up and being polluted. Warm water temperatures and low flows are killing our fish. So with all this ecological knowledge that's out there, we should be able to bring a lot to the table. But with our flawed consultation process, sometimes we can't even get a seat at the table. And it needs to trickle down federal, state, and local, because a lot of times we have very difficult times. The consultation process and the idea that the tribes have something to offer is there, but it's sometimes blocked at the local level. So, my question, tribal consultation was initially made an official policy by the federal government by President Clinton's Executive Order 13175. The Bush administration failed to follow the policy, but the Obama administration issued a memorandum requiring federal agents to engage in tribal consultation on issues impacting Indian country. Tribal consultation is best when the consultation is mandatory, feedback is made public,
Yeah.
and metrics are used to determine whether or not feedback is implemented by the agency.
Right.
As president, how do you plan to revise, amend, and implement the Tribal Consultation Executive Order?
Well, first by bringing back the Tribal Nations Summit at the White House, and immediately, and by also requiring cabinet officials to engage in tribal consultation because there has to be some input at the front end in terms of impact, and also to your point in terms of best practices. I also will mention a bill of mine, I call it the Climate Equity Act, which would bring tribal and other frontline communities into our review process in terms of regulatory review to make sure that all of the environment and climate related legislation receives an equity score that will transparently estimate the impact on frontline communities. Because back to your point, we need to keep metrics and we need to measure it. It can't just be lip service, oh, we had a meeting. It also has to be that we measure whether there's actually been follow through and also outcomes.
Thank you, Senator. You have a couple minutes if you want to make a last minute pitch, and let us hear what you have to say.
Well, I'll just say that I'm honored to be with you and all of the leaders who are part of this forum. And I can't thank you enough because your leadership is about, not only making sure that we speak truth about our history, but that we also acknowledge the relevance and importance to who we are today and who we can be. But I will tell you, and I promise you, to be a president who, on the issues of not only, again, the generations of violence and oppression, but also on the fact of the work that needs to happen to restore tribal lands and to address the historical trauma that has resulted from these abuses. I promise you I will be a president that speaks truth about these issues and acknowledges it in a way that is honest and is meant to require that the United States government fulfill its responsibility to acknowledge history and also to acknowledge the sovereignty of the leadership and the government to government relationship. And so I thank you for the time.
Panels.
Thank you.